Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, aka PD Beats.
PD Beats here from Popternative, speaking to Skeet Ulrich about Blood in theaters January 27th, on digital January 31st. Welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I mean, this is totally your first horror movie ever, right? Let's be honest.
I know. I didn't even know. It's the first one I've ever seen, too.
You know what? When I got this interview confirmed, I was like, I got to say something like that. But I was like, how is it going to be received?
I hear you. I get it.
But it's out of the way. I always get interested what the mindset is reading a script for something like Blood and then kind of going and shooting it and everything. Does it kind of differentiate mindset-wise depending on the project and the genre, or is it always kind of the same for you, kind of reading it and then going do your thing when you actually shoot this thing?
Yeah, I mean, each time is different. I think that's what's so fun about acting as a career. Every time is, I mean, there's some similarities in terms of prep and the timing and the execution. There are things that become habits or ways in or different things, but each story is a different journey. And this one, from the moment I opened it up, there was just something that was so compelling about it. And then when it's in the hands of Brad Anderson, it's like, it just gets that much more interesting and compelling. And that the script is just a blueprint for something even more interesting. So, it's an interesting process, and it is different every time.
It's interesting, too, because the horror genre keeps getting elevated and different, and we're finding kind of different ways to scare people. Skeet, you obviously have the traditional kind of gore and jump scares in Blood, but it's got kind of the head games, the mind games with the, why did this person say this? Why are they looking a certain way? Do you notice that as well when you're reading the script for this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a tone to it that, that sort of, as you complete that first reading. And I always think the first reading is so important. I try and remember all the things I was curious about, all the things I wanted answers for, all the things I felt, all the things that were surprises, whatever, you try and really hang on to those. You wind up reading it 50, 60 times, but you have to go back, try and get back to that first time, that first feel, and always perform, for me anyway, from that sort of initial reading, what was going on. And, but yeah, it was an interesting one. I mean, it was just so compelling, and the relationship was so dynamic, and the kids. I just felt like such an interesting family even before things went really weird. So
yeah, it kind of has those kind of turning points in this movie where it's kind of like I'm watching this movie and I'm like, yeah, this is not gonna end well for a lot of these characters.
That's so funny. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting to kind of have those kind of moments where it's kind of like the point of no return. I remember being in English class and we had like tragedy class, and it was like part of the whole essay. It's like the point of no return. We were talking about Thelma and Louise. Remember that movie?
Yeah.
Time where there's no going back. It's interesting, right, to kind of see that on script.
Yeah, there are. It's hard to not. I don't know when we can sort of say things about it, without spoiling it.
Yeah, we're always walking on eggshells during these interviews. Let's be honest.
You're right. There are many moments where you go, "Oh, it cannot get worse," or this is not gonna. You're right. This is not gonna end well. Is a distinct thought I had at one particular point. With young Finlay, who was phenomenal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he also did another horror movie that I loved. I don't know if he ever talk to his family about this too, called the Banana Splits movie. He was in that one too. Like basically kind of like the Chuck E. Cheese kind of gone wrong, basically.
No way.
Yeah.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah. He's great in it. Is the best part of being a story, because Skeet Ulrich is a storyteller, that's what you do. Is the best part of it diving into the worlds of Blood, Riverdale, Scream? Is that the best part about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a traveling circus of people, and I've always felt that it takes every single one of us, and that dynamic that gets created, and that sort of creativity that you can feel on certain projects as everybody starts. It's a beautiful thing. It's a collaboration unlike any that I've ever known, and I'm sure there are other fields that maybe are similar. Maybe making an album is similar, or I just don't know. But for me, that part of it is just so interesting, and yeah, the homework that all the however much time you have, whether it's 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, whatever, all that constant mental energy towards solving this puzzle or figuring out how to best put it together, and what I tend to read things and hear them as like a symphony, and think, what instrument am I, and how do I help this whole song?
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And that that is really fun to sort of come up with all that stuff, and then come and play and hear how, I thought I was a tambourine, but
so are you a different instrument for each like project, or are you always kind of the guitar, like the drums?
I feel like it's different all the time.
That's cool, yeah. Because I feel like it's all storytelling, but I feel like depending on the role, the story, the feel, I feel like the cinematography is the biggest thing these days too, Skeet. Like what you're kind of getting yourself into aesthetic wise, I think is a big one. So that's great that you say that. I do have to ask, because you look at Blood, which is a horror film. You look at Scream, kind of where it all started for you, basically, if you think about it. I mean, that was just, and it, like, no shelf life, right? Like, always going to be around there. But you look at projects that you've worked on that are not necessarily horror, that kind of have those kind of creepy kind of thriller elements to it. I'm wondering if you're noticing that's how popular the genre is, that it kind of keeps creeping in those kind of feeling, like those kind of styles creep into other genres that aren't horror. Like Riverdale had some very kind of like dark moments. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Do you think about that you were part of such a big genre that creeps into other genres as well?
No, not necessarily. I hadn't really, but now that you say it, it's hard not to. And I think you're right. And now I sort of wonder why that is, and to some extent, some of that is the business aspects. I would imagine that, those are elements that sell, and, so maybe they're trying to weave certain things in, but for some reason, I'm reminded of Touch, something I did before Scream, where I'm, essentially playing not essentially, he was the sweetest soul I've ever played, yet he was bleeding from his hand.
Yeah.
And so you're right. There seems to be some aspect of this genre in many, many things. Maybe
and the craft also like scared the crap out of me. Like there were some moments in that movie that
what do you think what genre do you think that's a horror movie?
I think it's a horror, but I think it's supernatural, obviously.
Yeah,
that was very creepy, because these were people that like they were capable of witchcraft, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is so no, I definitely think you could put it as horror, but I do want to, like, when I got this interview confirmed, because I'm sure like Billy Loomis is a character that will never kind of leave, and everyone's going to ask you about it.
Right,
but the one thing that I was excited to ask you about, which is something I hope you're not asked as much as other, is what's it like being part of the start of a franchise that got some of the biggest and most incredible minds of horror these days into filmmaking? Because that's something that I think is crazy, right? Like some of the biggest names talk about Scream, wanted them to make horror movies, which is huge, man.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was the good fortune of being a part of, being with Wes Craven at a time when he was sort of, and Kevin Williamson, who was really a newbie at that time in terms of, I'm sure I think he had written a lot of stuff, but in terms of things being produced, I think that was one of his first, if not his first.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. There was, I didn't feel like necessarily I was a part of a franchise because I only did the first one.
Yep.
And now more recently, I guess because of 5, I sort of get it.
Origins,
Nev's probably,
absolutely.
Nev's certainly the person, and Davey, to know a little more, and Courtney. But in terms of its impact, yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. And to go to these conventions, these horror conventions, and the veracity of these fans, still, like, even now hitting another group of teenagers, and they're impacted by it and so into it. And like, I just don't know.
I just figured from the creative filmmaking perspective, because I'm also like a creative as well. I wrapped a short horror movie that I co-wrote and produced last year, right? And it's like, that's that like from a filmmaker perspective, because from a fan perspective, there's all these kind of questions that you get. But that movie makes people want to make horror movies. Like those movies are very influential. I think that's something that's not talked about as much, Skeet, if I'm being honest with you.
Wes was a bright man who looked at things from a psychological perspective. I mean, he chose Freddy Krueger's colors of his sweater for particular emotional responses. I mean, he was onto something, and he talked often about how, laughter is this far from tears and from fear, and fear is the same thing. And so if you could get people laughing, you could bend it really quick and wind up maybe making them cry as well, or so there's something to that is even beyond me as a filmmaker, as someone in films that I think greater minds have figured out.
It's crazy. And then one last quick question before we wrap up too. I mean, like Riverdale was on before, I feel like, the really big kind of streaming boom and social media boom and everything. Did you notice the global impact of that show pretty early on, or was it a couple of seasons later realizing, wow, this is a show where people from all around the world love all these characters? Like, was it like right away, or was it like after a couple of seasons?
I mean, I think the right away portion was, I was not really into social media, or, I came through this business when we didn't even really want to do talk shows, and stuff like that. And so, but I saw, like, all of a sudden going from like 10,000, I don't even know how few, to like millions. I was like, and it was a slow progression, but it got to 1 million and then a couple, and I was just like, wow, but in terms of US, it doesn't hit Netflix until it finishes airing all the season on the CW.
So there's kind of this like kind of limbo period.
Yeah, and not many people watch traditional network television anymore. So there wasn't this wave in America. But then the second, like, I'll never forget some of us going to Paris together, and Cole was with us, and Lily, and and a lot of the core group, and you couldn't leave the hotel. There were thousands of kids lining the streets of Paris, like just waiting to get a glimpse of. Unlikely that it was me, but Cole, whatever it was.
Then they all found out it's Billy Loomis.
Yeah, but then you sort of went, oh shit.
Yeah.
And, but we were getting data on, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and that it was the number one talked about show across all 3 platforms every week of the year for 3 years in terms of TV.
Nuts. No, it's so crazy, man. The impact of the projects that you've worked on, like Scream Riverdale, is just unbelievable. And I wanted to say, Skeet, it was an honor and privilege to speak with you, man. Thank you so much for your time. Seriously.
Oh, thank you, man. I love your energy.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Well, here's the thing, man. If like we're not excited, like, what are we doing here, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no
Blood is going to be in theaters tomorrow, and then on digital January 31st. You know what I mean? So
yeah, finally.
Right around the corner. And then you're and then like you said, kind of your Instagram account is just your name, right? Skeet Ulrich.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
So they can check that out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been Popternative, youtube.com/Popternative for previous episodes. Blood is going to be in theaters January 27th and on digital January 31st. Until next time, it's Skeet Ulrich and PD Beats signing off.
Sweet.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.